Who do I feel was the greatest boss to work for? Paul Heyman or Vincent Kennedy McMahon? Hey everybody, it's D-Von Hughes here, or AKA D-Von Dudley. Today, I'm going to talk about two of my bosses. One that I liked and, well, maybe one I didn't like. Vincent Kennedy McMahon and Paul Heyman. The first boss, Paul Heyman. The first boss I ever had in pro wrestling. Some call him Paul Heyman, some call him Dr. Frankenstein. Some call him the greatest mind in the wrestling business ever. I had the pleasure of working with this man. And, you know, it was because of Paul, he discovered me and made me who I am today. D-Von Dudley was born in ECW on April 13th, 1996, all because of this man right here, Paul Heyman. I basically had my first encounter with Paul at the ECW studio. He asked me to come down to the studio so he can get to know me. And of course, I'm a nervous wreck. But I went in there, you know, not knowing what to expect, and Paul was just as pleasant and easy to talk to as any of my bosses ever in my life. Paul made you feel comfortable. He made you feel like you had known him and been in the business for 100 years. That's how comfortable you became when you were with Paul. So basically, I sat down, he asked me a few questions, and one of the questions he asked me, what's your favorite movie? Rocky III. He goes, Sylvester Stallone? I go, no, Mr. T, Clubber Lang. I said, that's who I used to idolize as a kid. I used to imitate him after Rocky III came out and thought the world of Mr. T. Paul said, you can do Mr. T right now. I said, yep. So I took a scene from Rocky III where Mr. T interrupted Rocky's retirement over by the big statue and called out his wife, hey woman, hey, and all of that good stuff. Paul heard that and said, my God, you sound just like him. He was like, what else do you like? And I said, well, Mike Tyson. Big, huge Mike Tyson fan, love Mike. Back then when I had hair, I used to put a part down the middle of my head like Tyson because I was basically paying homage to Tyson. After telling him I like Tyson, he said, have you ever seen the movie Pulp Fiction? Because I had given him a background of my parents being reverends and going to church all the time. And I said, no, I've never seen it. I heard of it. He goes, I want you to go home and take a look at it and then come back and talk to me. I want you to look at Samuel L. Jackson in the movie. Oh, I said, okay. I had no idea why. Well, D-Von Dudley is going to be your name. And your character is going to be a cross between Samuel L. Jackson, Mr. T, with that Mike Tyson fury. And that's how D-Von Dudley was born. D-Von Dudley was all Paul Heyman. When I realized that Paul Heyman was a complete genius was the night of Barely Legal, ECW's first pay-per-view. That pay-per-view was either gonna make the company or break the company. We had to hit a home run, and Paul knew that. Paul gathered everybody around a certain area at the ECW arena and laid it out. That speech that Paul gave at the arena, man, still gives me goosebumps to this day. Not to mention how he was able to fire up a bunch of people like us, who some might even consider us degenerates, pump us up so good that we went out there and struck a home run. Sure, we had nerves going through our bodies, but you know what? We knew after hearing that speech from Paul, we had to go out there and hit a home run. And every time we were down and out and we needed to hit a home run, Paul would deliver that speech and the locker room would lighten up and we would hit a home run every single time. There was never room for disappointment. I got nothing but love for that man. And even though we didn't finish our career in ECW, we went on to the big game, I still always had love for Paul and ECW. And ECW will always be my first love. Let's go to another boss of mine, one I believe everybody knows. Vincent Kennedy McMahon. I remember seeing Vince for the first time at the Manhattan Center when ECW invaded Monday Night Raw for the first time. I remember that as clear as day because that was the day I met Vince McMahon. And you could feel his aura. You always heard about it, but you actually was able to feel it. And so with that being said, it was one of those things where even though I might have been intimidated by the man, I still wanted to work for him. Vince was always that tyrant that made sure that what he wanted went, and that was it. End of story. So my hat goes off to Vince. Not to mention, the man made me a superstar. I always like to say Paul Heyman made us stars, but Vince McMahon made us superstars. So again, I got to thank that man, because without him, I wouldn't live in the house I have, drive the car that I drive, be able to put my kids through college. All of that was all because of Vincent Kennedy McMahon and the McMahon family. So I got to say thank you. Thank you for all of that. Some of the things I didn't like about both individuals, Paul, had so much responsibility on his hands, he trusted nobody. Even though he knew he needed help, he was still going to carry the load all by himself. He didn't care. And I think that's what burned him out. And probably one of the things that I feel that probably closed the doors of ECW. You got to have that help. You got to be able to put your pride aside and go, hey, I need help. Can you help do this? Can you help do that? And, when you're trying to live up to the hype that ECW created, it's hard to keep doing it on a regular basis when you don't have any help. So, that was one of the things I wish Paul could have done, because maybe the company would have been around. Who knows? But that's one of the things that I feel that Paul basically, I didn't like about it, because I wanted to see ECW survive, because it was my home. It was my first home. And it was sad to me when it was gone. In terms of Vince McMahon, some of the things I didn't like, when you did something wrong, you knew that your ass was in trouble and you had to face him. And nobody wanted to walk that hall of shame or having to listen to Vince berate them. It makes you feel like you're a child. You're a grown-ass man, and yet you're getting berated like there's no tomorrow. He makes you feel that small. But then when he wants to praise you, he makes you feel that big. So that's one of the things I love about Vince, that he can do that. He has that way of, it's like a puppeteer. He can make you happy, he can make you sad. It all depends on how you make him feel. That's some of the qualities I like and some of the qualities I dislike of Vince. But wait a minute, I'm not done. I gotta tell you the qualities I love about Paul Heyman. Save the best for last. You see, Paul was an evil genius. There were a lot of people that didn't know how to cut promos. And when they first started, they were horrible. But yet Paul worked with them night and day until the person was able to understand how to cut a promo. I was one of them. Didn't know how to cut a promo. Paul gave me guidance, showed me how to do the promo, and it never failed me. So I love the way that Paul took the time to invest in his talent. Not to mention he cared, and you knew he cared. Paul had a big heart. And if he felt that you had one too, then you were going to be on his good side. But don't piss him off. He'd make you pay, but you would never know about it. Which one of these two men was hard to negotiate a deal with? What made Paul hard to negotiate with? Because sometimes you couldn't get him on the phone. He was so busy and so tied up and being pulled from every direction, it was hard to get in touch with the man. So the deal that should have taken maybe a week or two, or maybe even 3 weeks, took maybe a month, 2 months, sometimes even 3 months. But again, can't put it all on Paul. So much responsibility, yet not enough time in the day to take care of business. Paul Heyman was so being pulled from every direction that we pretty much had to, make sure that when the shows that were put on VHS tape had to be sent out to the different TV stations, we had to make sure that Paul sent it out. And one of the stories that I remember hearing Bubba say was one of the stations, I forget where, called Bubba and told him that we haven't received the tape for the show yet, and the show is supposed to air tomorrow. We're looking for it. What do we do? So Bubba goes, I'll call you right back. So he calls Heyman on the phone and he goes, Paul, did you send whatever TV station the tape for the show? Absolutely. I FedExed it. He goes, you FedExed it? He goes, yes. He goes, Bubba goes, what's the FedEx number? Paul went 57667Z24, whatever. So Bubba goes, Paul, that's one too many numbers. He goes, take one off. He never sent it. Needless to say, I believe the show still made it, but he never sent it. That's one of the greatest stories I think I had ever heard about Paul. He was a funny guy when it came to stuff like that. Out of these two men, who do I feel is the most creative one? Paul Heyman, I feel, in my opinion, is probably, like I said, Dr. Frankenstein himself, an evil genius, someone who built a company like ECW and built it to Extreme Championship Wrestling. 3 letters that in pro wrestling will never be forgotten. So as far as I'm concerned, even with all the office stuff that Paul might have had on his plate, he still found time to be able to do storylines and make things so memorable that you would never forget it in ECW. So which one of these gentlemen was a better on-screen talent? Sorry, Vince, I gotta do it again. Although both men were extremely good in terms of creating talent, Paul actually took some bumps, just like Vince did, but didn't look as awkward as Vince did when he did the bumps. Paul with that big phone hitting people in the back of the head, and of course Mr. McMahon being Mr. McMahon with the whole thing with Stone Cold Steve Austin taking the stunner, which I thought was hilarious because it was probably the worst stunner in stunner history, but that was Vince. But Heyman, you know, actually did a lot of stuff. Even wrestled Medusa in WCW, did what he did. But it's still at the same token, I got to think Paul was the more talented one in the ring. You know, nothing against Vince, but Paul just had it and he understood it. And that's one of the greatest things about being a promoter. You have to be able to know what it's like to be inside that ring. You have to know what it's like to take a bump, just to be talented in general. Because how are you going to tell your workers, your team, how to be in the ring when you've never done it yourself? And then in terms of Mr. McMahon's mic skills, I mean, they were good. And I feel the same way about Heyman. Heyman's mic skills were incredible. Like I said, he could lead a pack of 1 million people and have them doing exactly what he said. It's just weird how good he is and how talented he is on the mic. And I don't think there's anybody that can outdo Paul on the mic. And I mean no one. His wits about him when he's doing a promo is like no other. So who wins that battle? Paul Heyman. Who's the better businessman? Paul Heyman or Vincent Kennedy McMahon? You gotta leave it to Vincent Kennedy McMahon. You know, before Bubba and I became superstars in the WWE, you know, we were in that place called ECW. We had a little bit of merch here and there, but really didn't sell, really didn't do well. We got to WWE, Vince McMahon put us on video games, action figures, t-shirts, you name it, we had it all. And to know the type of business person that Vince was even before I got to the WWE, I was excited about working for him and being under that umbrella. Nothing against Paul, you know, but when it comes down to who was the better businessman, absolutely Vince McMahon. And I think Paul would attest to that as well. Not saying anything negative about Paul. I love Paul Heyman to death. But when it comes down to it business-wise, it's got to be Vince McMahon. That's how he ran this empire called the WWE. Now the grand finale, the one that you've been waiting for. The answer to who do I feel was the greatest boss to work for? Paul Heyman or Vincent Kennedy McMahon? This is a landslide with Paul. He's been winning just about all of them. I love you, Vince, don't get me wrong. But the bond that I had with him before I met you, that kind of takes over. So I'm sorry, but no hard feelings. Paul was just somebody that made you feel connected to him. He made you feel like he genuinely cared, because he did. And I will always be grateful to him. And I will always owe him gratitude like you wouldn't believe for what he's done for me and my family. So Paul, thank you. Thank you for always being in my corner. And thank you for believing in D-Von. Because without you, there would be no me. Hello, everybody, and thank you for watching this YouTube channel. I would hope that you would please like and subscribe to this channel. Get the word out there. And ladies and gentlemen, I would like to get your thought. Who do you think is the better boss? Vince McMahon or Paul Heyman? Come on, let me know. So please leave your comments below, because you know what? It's always time to get the tables. And oh, my brother, testify. See you soon.